And I mean, you got to remember, and I know you know this, but I'm just saying this for our audience. Album slots are very finite. You don't get a whole lot of space for music on these albums and records and things. So, the songs that make the cut are, I would imagine. I'm not an artist, but I would imagine it's very very important to the artist, especially if that artist is also a songwriter. Not even talking about their own art and their own creativity, but there's also the monetization side of it, where the songwriter typically makes more money off of a song if it's their own on a record. Is that not true?
It is true. Those are called mechanical royalties, and
Right.
mechanical royalties used to be a big thing. Um, they're not so much anymore, as we know. People don't buy vinyl. They
Right.
don't buy CDs anymore. They don't really download MP3s from iTunes. Where most people get their money nowadays is streaming, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and the the streaming royalty rate is really paltry.
It's
Um,
horrible.
I'll give you an example. I had a Jason Aldean record called "Back in the Cigarette," and I looked at my BMI statement in one particular quarter, one 3 month period. It had 1,200,000 spins on
Wow.
Pandora. I made $28.
There you go. There you go. It's time to go to IHOP,
So
right?
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
So I got a funny story. You don't mind if I tell stories too, do you, Joe?
I don't mind at all.
Okay. Have you ever heard of a young lady named Heather Little?
I have not.
Okay, so Heather has co-write credits on a couple of Miranda Lambert songs, including "Gunpowder and Lead," and
Oh,
she
nice.
wrote "Me and Charlie Talkin'" and a couple of other songs as well. And Heather is a friend of mine. She's from East Texas and lived in a town called Lindale. She's actually in Nashville now, writing songs for folks. And but anyway, she used to tell a story where she was a custodian at Lindale High School, and one day she was in the bathroom cleaning the toilets. Okay, this is how she told the story. She was cleaning the toilets, and a young lady, a student, came into the bathroom, and her song was the ringtone on this girl's phone while she was doing her makeup or whatever. Gunpowder and Lead literally played while the writer of the song was cleaning a toilet, like 4 feet away. Like, what a crazy
Oh,
thing to hear. It's just a cool story.
well, that's evidence that streaming is not
Yep.
supporting songwriters.
It's not
It goes
enough. Yeah, it's not enough.
well when, for instance, that Reba album that I had a song on. The album was called "From Our Broken Heart,"
What
and
multi platinum album?
it's almost five now
Yeah,
million.
crazy.
So I had been at BMG for about 3 years when that came out. I'd had a couple of cuts, but nothing of significance. And all of a sudden, that came out. And because so many people bought that record, I think it went double platinum within about 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, it was quick.
That I was recouped. So all of the advances that I had been given for those 3 years, because I wasn't getting much as a 23-year-old kid, um, I was recouped. So it ensured that I could keep my publishing deal with BMG because, but nowadays, um, even the biggest artists, like I don't even think Luke Bryan is selling multi platinum. He's
Yeah,
he's a huge star, but he's not selling multi platinum. And you didn't have to get a single back then to make a living.
that's good.
Um,
It's that
now
way now, though, isn't it?
you have to have the singles, and they have to be terrestrial radio singles, meaning your FM stations that are
Yeah,
playing to large audiences. And those are really coveted spots. And when you were talking earlier about when they make decisions on what's going to be a single and what isn't, they're certainly thinking about, well, this is a pretty small pie now, so we don't want to give away too many of the pieces. And if you look at, what's amazing to me is the hits nowadays will have four writers on it, and that was unheard of when I
yeah.
was coming up. It was really admirable if you wrote a song by yourself. Now it seems like everybody's working the politics, and that's why there's so many different names
Well,
on
that's what I
people's
was going to
records.
ask you. Do you think there's like nefarious means behind that? Like, if somebody hears a song or gets a song that's written by a person or maybe even two, they just kind of, you know, tweak a line here or two, and now all of a sudden they have credits on it. Do you
Well,
think there's any nefariousness going on behind that?
well, nefarious is a pretty strong word,
It is. It is.
but I personally don't know. I've never had anybody approach me in that manner. But if you look back at people like Chuck Berry or those guys that came up in the '50s, that happened all the time. Somebody
Yeah.
would put their name on it, and the artist and the writer artist wouldn't even know until the record came out. All of a sudden, Alan Freed's name would be on the record. Like what?
Mhm.
And now that happened. Now, the Colonel, Elvis's manager, he was notorious for nefarious activity.
That's
One,
honestly where the question came from. I was thinking of him as I asked you that. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I don't know, and of course, it's very covert. So if it's never happened to me personally, I don't know.
Right.
Um, what I think is more the case is that there's become this track person and then top line person. I don't know if you're familiar with those phrases
I'm
or
not.
you're listening, but track writers, and this has become a trend down on Music Row, is you'll have these people who will create these beds of music. They'll lay down the drum machine track, they'll lay down keyboard part, a guitar part, but they're not really melody or lyric writing. And they will go and write with writers that are melody and lyric writers. So the bed is already built for you. I've only done that once. I think it was Kelsey Ballerini. Is that I think that's one of the.
Yep.
She had some hits.
Yep.
I was writing with a friend of mine, Mike Mobley, and her producer, and it was a really an odd. This is a number of years ago. He already had this track built, and we were writing to it, and it was so strange because that wasn't what I was used to. I was used to sitting at that keyboard or a piano or picking up a guitar, and it all coming at once, and then we'd go in the studio, and the better of the songs that you'd written would be approved by your publisher, and you'd go in the studio,
Hmm.
hire the pros, and go do demos. You'd do 5 songs in a 3-hour session, which was pretty nerve wracking actually because um, my songs in particular aren't your basic 3 chord songs. I don't do that on purpose. It's just the people I grew up on, the James Taylors, the Jackson Browns, the Paul Simons, their music was a little bit more complex, and that's what I, I came up with. Like I'll go back and I'll look at. I play this if I'm just bored. I'll sit at the piano and play "Buying Roses," and I'll morph into a song called "Never Mind to Lose" that Joe Diffie recorded and released. And I'll look and I'll think to myself, "Oh, that's a secondary dominant chord. Oh, okay, that chord's out of the key. Where did I was doing some of those things? I think because of my Berkeley experience as well.
Hmm.
Because if you didn't get into jazz at Berkeley, you were shunned.
Yep.
It's probably not that way today, but when I was there in the mid '80s, you had to get hip to jazz or you were an outcast, right?
Hmm.
So we know jazz is historically a bit more complex, especially harmonically. Um, I don't remember what my train of thought was where I got there, but um, going back to the demo sessions, it was nerve wracking sometimes because you're looking at the clock, and you want to get the fifth song in because your co-writers and your co-writers publishers are going to be concerned if the demo costs more than they were expecting it to
Yep.
cost.
Hmm.
But the beautiful thing about coming up through I moved to Nashville in early '88. All through the '90s, the companies had huge budgets for everything because there was so much money
Yeah.
floating around.
It's huge.
So it wasn't people weren't really that strict about you really had to really go over your budget to even hear about it.
Hmm.
I'm sure today it's a whole different story. And today, so much of what gets demoed is done by the writers themselves. They have
Mhm.
their own setups. We bought a Pro Tools setup here at the house as early as the early 2000s, but all we did was vocals. We'd go in the studio, cut the tracks, we'd bring the tracks home and record the vocals here to save money on all that overdubbing time. But nowadays, I think most of the demoing process is done by the writers themselves. And I think that's what publishing companies really want in a writer is someone who's self-sufficient on that
Mhm.
end of it so they don't have to spend
Yeah.
extra money.
Yeah, it's cutting. No, I don't want to say cutting corners. That's probably the wrong terminology, but it's definitely a cost saving measure for sure.